So Metal Gear Solid Delta is out into the world, and it's being received just about as well as you can expect for a game that is a one-to-one remake of a 2004 game that just looks really, really pretty now. It was a great excuse to play one of my favorite games of all time again, with some really great gameplay tweaks that really helped modernize the game for 2025, 21 years after its initial release. And not only that, Metal Gear Solid Delta is reaching new audiences just for the fact that it is 21 years later. There are a lot of people in the past 21 years who may have been born and are playing games now, or just people who haven't played games until the last 21 years, and with the new release of Metal Gear Solid 3, a game that has been hailed as one of the greatest of all times, gives them an excuse to finally check out what everyone was talking about so long ago. And so now with the reception of Metal Gear Solid Delta being pretty goddamn good, and now that Metal Gear Solid is back in the limelight, this begs the question, what's next for Metal Gear? So there are a lot of ways that Konami could take the Metal Gear franchise going forward, but in this video what I'm going to do is basically line out what I personally would want them to do with the Metal Gear Solid franchise going forward. And because I think this is a really good idea, I know that Konami will not do this. So I'm setting myself up for disappointment when I say this. Or, by some miracle, maybe I'm a prophet and this is exactly what they end up doing, and that would be awesome, because I think this is an awesome plan. So we all know that Konami had recently released the Metal Gear Solid Master Collection Volume 1 a few years ago at this point. And in that collection we had Metal Gear Solid 1, Metal Gear Solid 2, and Metal Gear Solid 3, along with the original Metal Gear games and what have you, some bonus stuff there. And so naturally, with that being titled Volume 1 of the Master Collection, a lot of people are expecting a Volume 2 to be announced and released at some point, with many hoping we get the likes of Metal Gear Solid Peace Walker, Metal Gear Solid 5, and Metal Gear Solid 4 in this new collection, in this Volume 2 of the Master Collection. If we were to follow the pattern that was set up in Volume 1, yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and on paper, yeah, why wouldn't they do that, right? It makes sense to re-release Peace Walker, a game that was originally on the PlayStation Vita. There's also Portable Ops, which I'd imagine would get lumped into this collection in a similar fashion that the original Metal Gear games were lumped into Volume 1. And then you have Metal Gear Solid 5. Of course, Ground Zeroes and The Phantom Pain would just be considered one lump game because it was kind of weird that they were split in the first place. In hindsight, looking back on that, they probably should have just been one thing. It probably would have been a stronger start for Metal Gear Solid 5. Of course, Metal Gear Solid 5 is 10 years old, but if you looked at it today, it doesn't really seem like that. But I do know for certain that on Xbox Series X, it plays at 900p because it is still playing that same version from the Xbox One. So what you could do with that is just like, up-res it, bring it up to 4K, have it running on PS5 and Xbox Series X natively, but maybe you could get that at 120 frames, who knows? If it's on an Xbox 360, maybe it could be 120 on a PS5, who's to say? And then, of course, Metal Gear Solid 4, a game that has been trapped on the PlayStation 3 for an eternity. Games that are exclusive to the PS3 are essentially lost to time because of the way that system's infrastructure was, and that includes Metal Gear Solid 4. Finally, with the Metal Gear Solid Master Collection Volume 2, Metal Gear Solid 4 would be released again in a way that you can play it in 2025. The only way you can play this is, of course, if you have a PS3 or if you cloud streamed it on PS Now, which, as I'm saying this out loud, I don't even know if it still exists. Yeah, a Metal Gear Solid Master Collection Volume 2 sounds like a no-brainer. But I said all of that just to say, if it were up to me, this would never come out. We don't need a Master Collection Volume 2. You know why we don't need that? Why we don't need to remaster these games anymore? Because we're remaking them now. Metal Gear Solid Delta, the success of that remake, has shown us that there is an interest in this franchise and people will show up for these remakes. So if we're going to bring Metal Gear Solid back to the top of everyone's minds, we need to do this correctly. Sure, game preservation is great, And maybe someday we'll release Volume 2, but not right now. That would eat into the sales of our remakes. I am now talking as if I am a board member of Konami. We don't want to cannibalize the sales of our remakes by having a way to play these games in a modern sense. So Volume 2 is scrapped. We're putting it on the shelf for now. Maybe we'll revisit that project another time. But the next step that I think Metal Gear should take is hot off of the success of Metal Gear Solid Delta. We continue the Delta brand. Maybe we don't continue Delta brand, but you know, we might have to for synchronicity, but it's weird. I think it's weird. But the next game that we release for Metal Gear, the next remake we do, a lot of people, they want Metal Gear Solid 1. You're not getting the Metal Gear Solid 1 remake. No way. I've also seen people hypothesize that they're going to do Metal Gear Solid 2 next. Absolutely not. That doesn't make any sense. That's stupid. I do think that stems from the fact that they are both on the PS2, and the things that they learned from doing the Metal Gear Solid Delta Snake Eater remake would be able to easily translate over to a Metal Gear Solid 2 remake. That's dumb though, I think, because with Metal Gear Solid Delta Snake Eater being the first reintroduction to the Metal Gear Solid franchise, or the Metal Gear franchise for many people, this game takes place at the very start of the Metal Gear timeline. And so I think you already know where I'm headed with this. With Metal Gear Solid Delta Snake Eater, the developers of this game were able to really learn how to make a classic Metal Gear Solid game. How to work within those levels, how to make all of those systems work, how to get it to feel like a Metal Gear Solid game. But in 2025, a modern Metal Gear Solid. Not only that, they're able to familiarize themselves with Big Boss and the characters surrounding Big Boss, that era of Metal Gear, and a lot of the setting that would surround Big Boss usually. Which I think would translate pretty easily into doing a remake of Peace Walker. And obviously Peace Walker would have to have a lot more work done to it to make it in line with Metal Gear Solid Delta Snake Eater, because as I mentioned earlier, this is a PS Vita game that is very much a PS Vita game and has a lot of gameplay elements that lend itself more towards a pick up and play sort of style, as opposed to a I'm gonna sit here for the next 10 hours and beat this game in one sitting. So this would be quite the overhaul and quite the task for Konami to do, which is also why I don't think they're going to do that, even though I really think that'd be so sick if they did it, and this is my video, so I can say that. This is what I would want them to do. I know they won't, but they should. Yeah, do a full remake. You might even say it's a reimagining of Peace Walker, because me personally never played Peace Walker because of, you know, the portableness. And of course, in that same case, you would also combine the stories of Peace Walker and Portable Ops and jam it all into one reimagined version of Peace Walker. Because from what I understand, Peace Walker has a lot of good story in it. So I'd like to experience that, but I don't want to play the Vita game. Remake that, you know what I mean? And that would be the next release for Metal Gear, I think. Konami, if you're listening, take some notes, please do. And then after that, what's next? What's next in the timeline? Oh, yeah. Metal Gear Solid 5, The Phantom Pain, plus Ground Zeroes. We're going to release that again. We're going to re-release that. We're going to just remaster this one, though, because, like I said, it is 10 years old, and by that point, it'll probably be 15 years old, but it still is like, look at it. Come on. It looks great. You just need to up-res that, remaster some assets. I'll say it. This era of Metal Gear is the era I'm least familiar with Peace Walker. I've never played Peace Walker. I'd never played through Metal Gear Solid 5. From what I understand, there is a lot of controversy surrounding Metal Gear Solid 5. And the fact that there are some things perhaps left unsaid in Metal Gear Solid 5, would it be insane? Would it be too crazy for Konami to go back to Metal Gear Solid 5 and add in those missing pieces? Because from what I understand, again, correct me if I'm wrong, from what I understand, we're missing the final mission or something like that in Metal Gear Solid: The Phantom Pain. that would connect it to the wider Metal Gear Solid timeline? What if we add that back? And I know what you're thinking. How are you going to get Kiefer Sutherland to come back to voice that final mission or whatever? You don't. The stupidest thing about Metal Gear Solid 5, and honest to God, the reason I haven't been compelled to play Metal Gear Solid 5 The Phantom Pain is because Kiefer Sutherland is the voice of Snake in that game. What are we doing? What happened? Why did we allow that to happen? Why was there not outrage? There probably was outrage. I just wasn't cognizant of it at the time. I was 15. There should have been enough backlash to make Konami step in and say, Kojima, I know you love the hit TV show 24, but that's not Snake, dude. You know that's not Snake. Konami, of course, did step in eventually. It stopped other things, which maybe that kind of sucked. But different time. 15 years later at this point, when this comes out, we re-released Metal Gear Solid 5 The Phantom Pain, the complete edition, with all of Snake's VO redone by David Hayter himself. Because in the promotion of Metal Gear Solid Delta Snake Eater, he was very, very heavily involved. He was all over that promotion, all over the promotion for Metal Gear Solid Master Collection Volume 1 as well. So he clearly is still all in on doing the whole Metal Gear thing. So bring him back, do it right, do the right thing, Konami. Redeem yourself. Like, obviously we are still a little trepidatious about Konami because of the whole breakup with Kojima after a successful remake of Snake Eater and at this point a remake of Peace Walker. They're kind of in our good graces. Get in our good graces even more though, and bring David Hayter back for Metal Gear Solid 5. And I know you're thinking, oh, okay, well at this point, can we release the Master Collection now? Now that we've gotten through Peace Walker and that we've gotten through Metal Gear Solid 5, so that we can finally play Metal Gear Solid 4? Because that game is still stuck on the PS3, even in 2030, because of course 2030 is when Metal Gear Solid 5 is coming out again. No, you will not get the Metal Gear Solid Master Collection Volume 2. You will not get Metal Gear Solid 4 on any modern platforms for a long time. Metal Gear Solid 4 is the end of the timeline. Are we at the end of the timeline yet? No, we aren't. I want Metal Gear Solid 4 to become this mythical type of video game. A video game that you can only play if you have a PS3. That's what I want. I want Konami to just hold on to Metal Gear Solid 4 for as long as possible. Build it up in so many people's heads, because I gotta tell you, as far as video game finales go, you don't get better than Metal Gear Solid 4. So you can't blow your load early and release it before you get there in the timeline as you're re-releasing these games, as you're remaking these games. And so if we're going to continue going down that timeline though, next up is going to be Konami's biggest swing. And that would be a full-on reimagining, remake, rebirth of Metal Gear. Yeah, those original games. These games obviously are ancient as hell, and I don't know anyone who's ever actually played them. But these games are the bridge between the two eras of Metal Gear. The placement of these games on the Metal Gear Solid timeline make them arguably some of the most important entries, and I don't think anyone has ever actually played them. And again, this is their biggest swing, because when you look at the original Metal Gear games, how do you translate that into a modern Metal Gear? I don't know, but by this point, they will know, because they will have had made a remake of Metal Gear Solid 3, a remake of Peace Walker, and a remaster of Metal Gear Solid 5. At this point, I think everyone will have enough trust built within Konami to trust them when they say that they're going to remake the original Metal Gear games, Metal Gear 1 and Metal Gear 2, Solid Snake, as one video game. And then I think it'll be really good. And then, of course, you remake Metal Gear Solid 1, you remake Metal Gear Solid 2, and at this point, yeah, you guessed it. Imagine this. Close your eyes for this one. We're at the Game Awards. Jeff Keighley's on stage. Well, maybe it's not Jeff Keighley, because I don't know if he forgave Konami yet. because he loves Kojima a lot. Maybe it's not Jeff Keighley. Also, maybe Jeff Keighley's not even hosting anymore, because who knows when this is happening. It's some host that we all know and love, and they said, you're gonna want to brace yourself for this next world premiere. And then you just hear this. And then people in the audience are going to be thinking, oh my God, is that The Last of Us Part 3? Are they finally doing The Last of Us Part 3? No, it's not The Last of Us. I do wonder, though, if The Last of Us has its music because of Metal Gear Solid 4, because they sound very similar. No. It's not The Last of Us Part 3. Finally, Metal Gear Solid 4. Guns of the Patriots. Okay, now you can open them back up. Remake. Because by this point, it will have been so far in the future that it has to be a remake. There's no other option. Like right now in 2025, they could just re-release it as a remaster and people would love it. But by the time they actually get through this timeline plan that I am suggesting, which obviously they aren't going to do, but it'd be so sick. It'd be so sick if they did. By this point, it will have been so long that the only course of action is a full-on proper remake of Metal Gear Solid 4. Smooth over some of those edges that it might have. Make the finale to the Metal Gear Solid franchise as insanely epic as it deserves to be. Because it is so incredible as a finale. And after all of this time, after all of the built-in hype, the built-in questioning of people wondering if we're ever going to be able to play Metal Gear Solid 4 again, it has finally paid off in this moment. And that's what I would do with the Metal Gear Solid franchise, if it were up to me. Obviously, that's me really just fantasizing what I would want, what would make me the happiest as a Metal Gear fan, I think. Not necessarily what makes the most business sense. It's one of those things where I think this would probably make more money in the long term, rather than what Konami will likely do, which is make more money now by releasing a Volume 2 ASAP as possible, and then just remaking probably Metal Gear Solid 1, and then just doing that, and then it fizzles out, and that's it for Metal Gear. The question is, are they ever going to make their own original Metal Gear? No, of course not. You can't make Metal Gear without Hideo Kojima. I don't want to be that person that says, oh, this franchise is so intrinsically tied to this one person that you can't do it without them, but I think Metal Gear is probably the one exception I would make with that rule, because I do think that kind of sucks. Because I do know that there are a lot of people with great ideas that would probably translate very well into a Metal Gear Solid type of game. But that's the thing. Just make a new IP at that point. Because Metal Gear is already so contrived and complicated that throwing your own hat into that ring would be a nigh impossible task. So just don't do it. If anything, start your own IP. Obviously, the Metal Gear franchise has a lot of cachet amongst gamers, but I don't know if people are gonna be thrilled at the idea of a new Metal Gear Solid without Hideo Kojima. So you could avoid that whole thing by just saying, oh, the team that has been remaking the Metal Gear Solid franchise for us, they're doing their own new thing that is a spiritual successor to Metal Gear Solid. Maybe they do that eventually, sooner rather than later, as opposed to remaking everything. Maybe they remake Metal Gear Solid 1 because that's the one that people really do truly want the most, I would say, in terms of remakes. And then they do a spiritual successor. I could very much see that making a lot of sense for Konami. But I don't know. This video is just this. Thank you for making it this far in this video. Thank you for indulging me for this long, because I just love Metal Gear. And I like to think about what could be. I like to think about the ways you could keep the Metal Gear Solid hype going for years and years to come. And I think my plan would work in doing that. But I don't know if that would work for Konami and them wanting money. So, who knows? But let me know what you would do with the Metal Gear Solid franchise in the comments below. What you think about what I would do, and what do you think Konami will probably do? Lots of questions for you to answer down there. In the comment section. I'd appreciate it if you answered any of those questions. But yeah, that'll do it for this video. Ended up being a lot longer than I thought, but once I get started talking about Metal Gear, good luck getting me to stop. You know what I mean? But that's it for me. So, as always, until next time, stay safe and play some video games.